There are people you've worked with for decades who wonder if you've personally sold out.
Well, I think most people understand that this is a wicked problem to which there are no easy answers or solutions whatsoever. In fact, there are no solutions. There are just better ways of managing it. We believe we've come up with a package that, in fact, is going to save many more lives every year than what was the case previously, but a package that will try to do it in safety and with some security. In my 25 years, we've been trying to get somewhere approaching 20,000 in the quota, and we've never been able to get there. With the increase in the quota, that will mean every year from now on, more people than the average number of boat arrivals over the last 4 years will be granted protection, resettled, and they'll be flown here safely. They won't have to risk their lives in a boat. People are not going to be on Nauru for 5, 10, 20 years or forever, as people have suggested. These things are short-term interim circuit breakers.
Senator, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Barry. Thanks for having me.
Paris Aristotle has spent a lot of time with torture victims, with those who have spent time in detention centres. His credentials are hard to fault. He says this is a package that will save lives.
Well, you know, there are some really good recommendations in this package, but unfortunately the government hasn't taken the good ones up. We're hearing stalling from the government about, in time they might implement them. What they've grabbed hold of is those that are the most punishing, those that are the nastiest. And rather than putting those safeguards in that people like Paris have so dearly fought for, that's not what went through Parliament last week. So in some ways...
But I haven't heard him make that complaint.
Well, what I've been listening to is the human rights experts out there, now even the United Nations, the Navi Pillay, the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, the UNHCR, who have seriously raised concerns about this is just a go back to the future under John Howard, the Pacific Solution Mark II. And people are saying, well, unless we put those guaranteed protections in place, unless we ensure, like Frank Kelly mentioned just earlier, those protections for people to access proper mental health services, we have a time limit on the length of time people are detained, then none of this is going to be any better than it was last time. And in fact, we know that detaining people indefinitely with no limits in a very remote island, in an island prison, costs people's lives. And it drives very, very brave, courageous, intelligent people to be madmen and to be insane.
But Paris Aristotle has said that he has dealt with people who are traumatised on Nauru, but he's also dealt with the trauma suffered by families who have lost people at sea.
Yeah, and I think we've all seen those tragic pictures, and I've heard many of those tragic stories from the asylum seekers that I've visited. One of the awfulest things about the situations facing those families who have lost their loved ones at sea is those people, those family members are still caught in detention centres here in Australia, and we're inflicting even more pain onto those people. There has to be a better way of saving people's lives at sea, and I absolutely understand that there is a willingness within the Australian community to come up with a better and a more compassionate approach. And that means we have to stop people boarding those boats in the first place.
That's what
not
happens.
waiting for them to board a boat only to then shunt them off into Nauru forever and a day, which is what the government's legislation does.
It's the policy you get when you don't compromise.
Well, I'm not prepared to compromise on people's lives, Barry. What I'm prepared to do...
Where you end up, end up with, from your point of view, with a policy that you think is worse than John Howard's policy.
Do you honestly think that Julia Gillard wanted anything other than a get tough, get mean, get tough like John Howard approach? Absolutely not. She was never prepared to compromise on a solution that was going to put human beings, refugees, at the centre. The recommendations from the report that are the good ones that say let's process people's claims in Malaysia and Indonesia where they already are, increase resettlement, bring them here safely. They're the ones that Julia Gillard is stalling on. She won't give us a time frame. She did that again this morning. Would not put a time frame on the good things that's going to help people.
But you look at your approach, and it's purity of policy. You delayed a carbon tax by 4 or 5 years because you wanted your policy. You weren't prepared to compromise. Now you're getting a situation where you've got a policy that you can't live with because you didn't compromise.
The policy that we have at the moment isn't the Greens' policy. And we've got at the moment indefinite detention for people on the Australian mainland. We don't have an increase to the humanitarian intake that the Greens have been calling for a long time. So the current situation is not what we want. I don't want people stuck on Christmas Island forever and a day. They currently are, and we're about to, rather than burden sharing with the region, we're burden shifting. We're saying, you know what, those poor Pacific Islanders, they can deal with our problems.
There's a lot of exaggeration around this issue, and what you have said is that these people are going to be locked up and left to rot for decades. Now, you know that not to be true.
Well, Julia Gillard just confirmed that it is, Barry, and the legislation...
Well, she said many years. That's not left to rot for decades.
Well, let's put a time frame on it then, because we know that the damaging aspect to detention, particularly remote detention, where people are away from services, they're isolated, is that length of time and not knowing what happens to you and your family. That's what drove vulnerable people to self-harm, to suicide, to madmen. And unless we deal with that key issue, we face those risks all over again. And the recommendations in the Houston's report tried to go to that heart. And they listed all of these things that if we were going to have people shunted off to Nauru, shunted off to Manus Island, or even, heavens above, to Malaysia, that these basic standards need to be put in place. And the government has ignored that. I moved in the Senate on Thursday night to put those basic conditions in the legislation so that there was no question that that's what we were committed to do, that the Australian government believes we need to treat people properly. And the government and the opposition voted it down. And the reason they voted it down, Barry, is because they said they don't want to be held to account if this doesn't happen. They don't want to be held to account. The other really concerning thing about what the government's done is ripped out all the protections for children. And that means whether you're an unaccompanied child or a child with a family, you have no out clause. There is no out clause for children in sending these people to Nauru and Manus Island. There's 10 unaccompanied minors sitting on Christmas Island today waiting their fate to be dumped, and I use that word because that is the word. They're not just being processed. It's not just about their claim being assessed. The government has said they will wait there until they've believed, even if they've been processed as a refugee, and their claim is accepted, they will wait there for resettlement until the government believes they've suffered enough. That is not a humane approach.
Until the government believes they've waited for as long as people wait in Malaysia and Indonesia.
And you know how long that is? Malaysia, it's 76 years. In Indonesia, it's 20. So let's get real about this. And how long are we going to keep people dumped on a prison island, away from services, no guarantees of protections, and children are in the exact same position? When I asked the minister in the Senate on Thursday night, I said, how come you've taken all the protections away from children? Why won't the minister be responsible for his guardianship of these kids? And you know what Kate Lundy, the responsible minister, said for me? Word for word. The government, it is unsustainable for the government to uphold the best interests of the child. Well, I think that's shameful.
Let's look at things that might be a bit different this time around, though, on Manus Island and Nauru. There will be more independent oversight that didn't exist before, and people will be free to come and go, but they will have a nighttime curfew.
Well, that's what we're being told, but again, none of that is in the law. And who can we trust on this issue? Can we trust that Tony Abbott is going to look after refugees the way the UNHCR believes they should, the way the UN Human Rights Commission believes they should? Absolutely not. Can we trust Julia Gillard? And Julia Gillard has no credentials on this.
Well,
she
to
has
this extent you can, because do you accept that this time around the media, politicians like yourself, will come and go to Nauru far more freely than they did during the Howard years?
Well, I hope so. I know one of the other questions that the government hasn't been able to answer as yet is who will have access to these detention facilities. I asked what type of access the media would have, because we know in Australian detention centres, the media access rules for Australian detention centres are based on the media access rules to Guantanamo Bay. And that's been found through the drafting documents. So is that the type of access we're going to have? I hope you get you're much more likely to get access than you would have under John Howard, but none of that's guaranteed, Barry.
I mean, I presume you'll be trying hard. You would want to make regular visits?
Look, I think it's really important that we don't allow the dumping of these people out of sight, out of mind, that we do try and get as much access as possible. And we'll have to try and get there as much as we can. But this is the whole point. This is what John Howard tried to do. He dehumanises. This was the whole strategy. Dehumanise these very vulnerable people, put them away, out of sight, out of mind. You can pretend you're being tough, you can be mean, and everybody will think you've protected the borders. And yet what happens, Barry, if the boats keep coming?
Yes, but what happens too if they stop coming in the numbers that they've been coming and some lives are saved? Will you accept that perhaps a lot of lives will be saved that might otherwise have been lost?
Well, I listen to what the experts are saying, and the experts, whether they be the UNHCR, who don't believe that these deterrent strategies are necessarily going to save lives.
Well, the experts are the three experts that the government nominated. And
you've got to look at who submitted to the panel. Over and over again, the UNHCR has said these deterrent strategies not are only just inconsistent with our obligations under the Refugee Convention, but they don't believe that they're going to stop desperate people taking that next, the only alternative they see to saving their lives.
But do you accept in a year or so we might know whether you're right or they're right?
Well, my concern is, Barry, what if they don't stop? What then? We've dumped all of these people out of sight, out of mind for what? And I don't think that any of us can sit here and accept that taking away children's rights with no out clause is acceptable at all. It's not acceptable under international law. I wouldn't think that as Australians we believe that we should be punishing children in this manner when there are safer alternatives. There are some really good recommendations in this report, but they are not the things that the government has grabbed onto, and they are definitely not the things that Tony Abbott is happy about.
OK, I want to ask you about same-sex marriages, because there has been advancement in South Australia and in Tasmania. There's still, who knows what will happen in the federal parliament when it comes up, but is there any way you can harness that and apply it at the federal level?
Yeah, look, I think it's been great to see the states taking the leadership on this and really showing up what most Australians want. We want to see marriage equality delivered in Australia. And to that point, this week in the Senate on Thursday, we will be finally debating my same-sex marriage bill, the marriage equality bill, try and get some movement on that issue in the federal parliament, because the majority of Australians accept that we should get on with it. No one agrees that Tony Abbott should be blocking his members from having a conscience vote. And let's face it, nobody believes Julia Gillard's position on it. It just doesn't ring true. And Australians just want us to get on and do it. So that's what we'll be doing on Thursday.
So it starts on Thursday, but what's the likelihood, as you say, of the Prime Minister changing her mind on this, or from Tony Abbott to allowing a conscience vote?
Well, Julia Gillard's really been shown up, isn't she? She's got the Premier in Tasmania, now South Australia, and even the opposition leader here in Victoria, all saying, actually, this should be part of the Labor platform. Oh, that's right, it is. They passed it in the National Conference. Let's get on and do it. They're showing true leadership, and it's time Julia Gillard saw the writing on the wall. Rather than being left on the wrong side of history, let's get on and get it done.
Thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Barry.